Number 10. Abandoned car. A desert park ranger on Reddit shared a few of their stories that they had experienced while working. One that stands out is their discovery of a burned and abandoned car. When they received the report, they weren't too shocked, as it wasn't a rare occurrence that cars would be stolen and abandoned, occasionally being burned. When they found the vehicle, and as they waited for the fire department to arrive, they were left standing in shock, as it was clear that there was a body left in the front seat of the car. They discovered rope and other strange items in the car, and it was determined that the body had been tied up and killed. The police arrived, but no answers ever came about what had happened there, and they now refer to the area as the haunted site.
Coming into number 9, we have death by carbon monoxide. In 2013, a 14-year-old girl was killed by fumes when her parents placed a bucket barbecue in the tent that they were sharing. Their family tried to minimize the fire damage, but had no idea that contained burning coals produce carbon monoxide. Now, if this is trapped in an enclosed space like a tent, it can and will kill. The incident took place at a campsite in Bucknell, Shropshire, United Kingdom. Hannah Thomas Jones was the closest to the barbecue and died overnight. Her mother Danielle Jones suffered carbon monoxide poisoning. She woke up and she couldn't move her limbs. Sadly, other members of the camping party found the child's body in the morning and called an ambulance, but it was too late to save her. Once again, don't bring coals or anything like that into your tent while you're camping. Coming into number 8, we have camping with the Klan. There is a Reddit thread in the Ask Reddit section all about creepy and unsettling camping stories. Beer Hunter 420 said that they were camping near a river when they'd been fishing and kayaking. They set up their tent with their friends in a purposefully remote spot, hoping for a quiet escape. Later, they all sat around the fire having a good time until they spotted a bigger fire in the distance, about 300 yards away. They said then they also heard chanting. Now, on a closer look at the fire, the campers realized that the group was burning a big cross. The cult members then started yelling about white power and scarily shooting their guns in the air. Isn't that terrifying? Because, like, Christ, the Ku Klux Klan and, like, also guns. Next, white supremacists are terrifying, but at least you can recognize an idiot when you see one. Coming into number 7, we have the silence. Another Reddit post here. This is from Biggs180. They shared a story about a camping trip in the Florida Everglades with friends. The group had retired to their tents for the evening and were beginning to fall asleep when one of them suddenly heard a very deep and low vibration. Then they all started to hear it and they began texting each other being like, you know, what's happening? After that, all nature was silent. This even included the bugs. All of the crickets around the tent just shut up. The 4 campers once again text each other about how freaked out they were, careful not to break the eerie silence. Eventually, all of the creatures started making noise again, but all of the campers didn't sleep a wink. When nature unanimously falls silent, you know that something big is going down. Coming into number 6, we have the Hangmans Tree. The Holcomb Valley Campground in Big Bear, California is a lovely place to camp, just don't go wandering near Hangman's Tree. The camping ground is near a mining ghost town, and if the ruins of an old settlement weren't enough to freak you out, nestled deep within the woods is Hangman's Tree, and this is an area that was used to enforce the law or even enact revenge in the 1800s. The area was huge with the Californian gold rush, and it attracted a few unscrupulous characters who were brought to justice here. Many campers who have hiked to the tree have reported paranormal goings-on and strange whisperings in the area. Some say that a gold smuggler uttered a curse as he was hung by the tree. I'm not sure that I'd fancy camping near all that bad juju. Coming into number 5, we have the ghosts of the Hawaiian night marchers. On the 5th of July 1995, Ricky, his girlfriend Jennifer, his friend Richard and Richard's son Ryan all went camping on a Hawaiian beach. Specifically, they were camping on Mokulia Beach on the island of Oahu. While they were on the beach at 10 PM at night, they saw distant flashes of light. Then, they saw a long line of torches on a mountain in the distance. It appears that they happened to spot the Night Marchers, a Hawaiian folk legend that says phantoms of ancient Hawaiian warriors roam the islands at night. Rumour has it if you share any blood relation with the Marchers you will be saved, or else you can pee on yourself for redemption. If you're in the path of a night marcher, you must strip naked and lay face down wherever you are. It seems that the group camping that night got lucky. They lived to tell the tale. Coming into number 4, we have the horrifying Lake Bodom murders. This is one of the most notorious unsolved crimes in Finnish history. In 1960, 4 teenagers were camping by Lake Bodom in Finland. What happened between the evening and the morning when 3 of the 4 youths were found brutally murdered, we aren't quite sure. A slashed and bloodied collapsed tent was discovered by a hiker the next morning, and when he went to investigate, 2 15-year-old girls and an 18-year-old boy were battered and stabbed to death. A 4th was left stabbed and unconscious. One of the girls, Malia Bjorklund, had been stripped naked from the waist down and had received the most stab wounds. Upon discovering the horrifying scene, hiker Risto Siren called the police and an ambulance. Luckily, the life of 18-year-old Niels Wilhelm Gustafsson was saved. Gustafsson was the sole survivor. He had concussion, facial bruises and fractures. He recalled seeing a vision of a black and red clothed attacker, which is terrifying. Now I can't imagine being Siren, the hiker who found them all, having to see all of that with your own eyes. That would really haunt me forever. Coming into number 3, we have the Wells Grey murders. In the summer of 1982, Bob and Jackie Johnson, their 2 daughters Janet and Karen, and Jackie's parents Edith and George Bentley went camping near Wells Grey Park in British Columbia. The family were reported missing a week after Bob failed to show up for work. Around 5 weeks after they'd set off for their camp trip, their bodies were found in a burnt out car on Battle Mountain Road. They'd been shot in the head with a .22 caliber weapon. Fast forward over a year later, and 24-year-old David Shearing was arrested. He later admitted to stalking the victims at their campground and shooting the adults in the head. He kept the 2 girls alive for a week, raping the eldest, 13-year-old Janet, repeatedly before killing them too. Coming into number 2, we have the mystery of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Something horrible happened to 9 ski hikers in northern Ural Mountains in Soviet Russia between the evening of February the 1st and the morning of the February 2nd, 1959. The group were experienced winter trekkers who had set up camp for the night on the slopes. On the morning of the 2nd of February, the bodies of the campers were found in a very disturbing scene. It seems that something in the night caused the group to tear out of their own tents without proper clothing to face the sub-zero snowy climate. 6 of the group died of hypothermia, 3 died from major fractures. 1 victim had their head bashed in, 2 others had crushed chests. Now 1 woman even had her tongue and eyes missing. The Soviet authorities investigated the suspicious deaths, but the case remains unsolved. Leading theories include an animal attack, an avalanche scare, infrasound, panic or assassination. Others say it could be paradoxical undressing from hypothermia, which causes people to act crazily. Others say it even could have been a yeti, or some say aliens. If in doubt, crack the alien theory out. The area remained closed for investigation for 3 years, but it is now open and has been named the Dyatlov Pass in memorial of Igor Dyatlov, the 23-year-old leader of the group.
Number 10, the Boulder. This pair of rangers responded to a distress call at 4 in the morning that had come from a family camping in Joshua Tree. The story they heard from the family was something they likely hadn't expected to hear. One member of the family was woken up in the middle of the night when a pebble fell from a large boulder next to their site and hit their tent. When they got up, they looked towards the boulder and saw a humanoid creature standing on top of it. They described it as very skinny and strange looking, moving in weird ways, and its eyes glowing in the dark. They said they couldn't mistake it for an animal since it had a flat face, not like a mountain lion or a coyote. As they watched, the creature seems to go down on all 4s, crawling down the rock before ascending it again and standing up. He had originally brushed it off as one of his cousins trying to play a prank, but once everyone had woken up, it was clear his whole family was accounted for. As they called out to it, it ran away, and he shined a light on it and said he can't really describe what he saw, except that it appeared to be naked and had a black mark on its body. The rangers tried to calm the family down by saying it was a mountain lion with mange, but I think we all know that what they saw was more than just a big cat. Number 9, abandoned sites. It's not uncommon to find abandoned campsites in the woods, but these rangers share their stories of the unique, strange, and scary things they found that made them stand out. The first was an abandoned house with a small shed hidden behind it. The shed had a large steel door which had been broken off its hinges when they found it. The windows had been boarded over and covered up, but venturing inside, they found only a queen-sized bed covered with burned sheets. The next was an abandoned tent found very close to the walking trail. Inside was a large stash of food like beans and rice, a sleeping bag, and a lonely teddy bear. Sometimes the stories with the least information and answers are scariest, as they allow our minds to wander and imagine various frightening scenarios. Number 8. Search returns strange evidence. A ranger and their coworker were called to head out and search for a group of teen hikers that had become separated from their group. They spent most of their day heading in the direction of where the teenagers had last been seen. Eventually, deep into the woods and their journey, they came across a startling discovery. They found branches which had been carved into spears placed into the ground, unidentifiable carvings in trees, children's stuffed toys hanging from ropes tied to the trees. One thing they noticed was that the symbols in the trees appeared to be freshly carved. As would be expected, the two were spooked, but settled down nearby as night was coming and they had to sleep. In the morning, they discovered shoe prints and a piece of fabric that had become caught on a tree. Someone had been there in the night. The teens were later discovered and the two workers returned back to base, never knowing who had been in the woods with them that night. Number 7. Strange creature. A camp counselor in New York made a scary discovery when he was sneaking out late at night to meet up with his girlfriend. It was about 1 a.m. when he heard rustling in the woods next to him, expecting to be faced with something like a bear, deer, or other wild animal. Unexpectedly, a creature burst forth from the bushes towards him. In the darkness, he described the creature's appearance as being 3 feet tall, standing on 2 legs, and having 2 arms, looking like a miniature person. While it can be easy to misidentify animals in the dark of night, I personally can't think of any normal forest creature that would match anything close to this description. He then moved towards it and it apparently got scared, running away in a strange manner that the camp counselor described as being similar to doing the robot dance. To this day, he has no idea what the creature might have been. Number 6. Light on the cliff. An unfortunate part of being a park ranger is having to go on search and rescue missions for missing people, and never knowing what state you might find them in, if at all. One park ranger recounts a story of him and his coworker on one of these calls, searching for a man in his 20s who had gone missing. As they spent the day searching with no luck, they decided to set up a camp and rest for the night. At about 2 a.m., he got up to go to the bathroom when he spotted a bright light moving on a cliff a few miles away, saying it looked to be like a flashlight beam. In the morning, they went to search that area and unfortunately found the missing man's body at the base of the cliff. What caught the ranger's attention was a flashlight, similar to the one he thought he had seen on the cliff. So it seems to make sense. The man had been walking with his flashlight and had unfortunately fallen. But it doesn't end there. When the coroner arrived to inspect the body, it was determined the man had clearly been dead for over 48 hours. So how could it have been him shining his flashlight on the cliff the night before? Apparently, another search and rescue team member had been near the area and hadn't seen any other people. To this day, there seems to be no explanation for what that light was. Number 5. Burned mannequins. Another park ranger on Reddit shared his experience while working at a national wildlife refuge that had formerly been home to a U.S. Army lab site. The site had been completely transformed to become a wildlife refuge, with years of thorough cleanup needing to be done on things like barbed wire fences and barricades before it could be opened. One night, when the ranger was walking deep into the forest, he saw figures in the distance. This caught him off guard, as you're not permitted to leave the trails at all. So who was out there? The ranger announced himself and moved closer, and what he discovered was 6 mannequins in military uniforms, which appeared to have been badly burnt. 6 burned figures standing around in the woods in the dark of night would have been scary for anyone to stumble upon, though apparently he chalked it up to having been part of a fabric test. Still pretty scary to discover though, and to think it was somehow missed in the decade-long cleanup of the park. Number 4. Only resident. A park ranger for a small island was the only year-round resident of the area. The island had no bridges or ferries and could only be accessed by private boats. The island would be crowded in the summer, but in the off-season, the island was only inhabited by the ranger. Walking at night, he was adventuring around the island, seeing if he could hike the entire distance. He saw a flash of white in the distance, thinking it was a herd of the brown and white deer which were local to the area. He pressed forward, before hearing something move again. Suddenly, out of the woods came a 6-foot-tall man, wearing a bright white shirt. He sprinted straight up to the ranger with a strange grin on his face, before shouting and laughing loudly, quickly sprinting back into the woods again. The ranger was rightfully terrified, because as far as he knew, he was the only person on the small island. For the next few days, he tried to find any evidence of another person living on the island, but never found any campsite, boat, or other signs of life. Number 3. Mysterious Stranger. A ranger was leading a hiking trip to the top of a mountain in North Carolina, a difficult hike far from any civilization. When they reached the peak, they set up a camp on a beautiful clear night. Since it was so nice out, after the group had gone to bed in their tents, the ranger chose to sleep outside in a hammock, reading a book to pass the time. Due to the brightness of the camp and the moon, it was easy for them to see around the camp and the trail that they had taken to get there. They were soon caught off guard by the sight of something moving, expecting it to be a bear. But as they got closer, they realized it was the shape of a person. They found it odd to see someone at the top of the difficult and long trail at night with no light or any sign of gear. They watched the person move closer towards the camp before the figure stopped, staring out at the camp. The figure stood there for a while before moving to sit under a tree, still staring intently. The ranger watched the man sit there for what was apparently a few hours, before the figure got up and made his way back down to the trail. This left the poor ranger with a paranoid feeling of being followed for the remainder of the trip. Number 2. Deer head. It's not uncommon to find animals or animal remains in the woods, circle of life and all that. But a Yellowstone ranger described their very bizarre experience which occurred near a valley deep into the park. While walking a trail, they found in the middle of the path the head of a deer. What was strange was that the head was perfectly clean, no sign of blood and no sign of an animal having tried to eat it. The ranger didn't find any other signs of other animals that may have been around the area and done this. They also had no explanation for why a human may have done this, as it was a doe with no antlers that a hunter may want to collect. The experience left the ranger shaking and desperately trying to come up with an explanation for the bizarre and shocking discovery, but none could be found. Number 1. Skin changer. One wildland firefighter shares a story that his supervisor had told him many times. Apparently, in Idaho, the crew had been working on a large fire incident and would have to be there through the night in order to deal with it. The supervisor went out on an ATV to get a look at the nearby area, when a large cat, seemingly a bobcat, ran out into the road. The animal stood there and stared at him for a while, before letting out a loud scream and running up a tree nearby the road. While startling, it didn't appear to be any reason for concern. Further down the road, he discovered an abandoned cabin. This was also strange, as the land was federal property and there should be no buildings. The house appeared derelict and was boarded up, everything inside appearing incredibly out of order. Unsettled, the supervisor got back on his ATV to head back, but at the exact same place where he had seen the bobcat, a woman stood in the road with a nightgown and bare feet. He asked if she needed help, to which she responded with a scream, before running up the same tree the bobcat had, faster than any human would be able to. After returning, he asked locals about the cabin in the area, recounting his experience, to which they told him that he had likely had an encounter with a skin changer.
Starting us off at number 10 with the Cunning Killer. On a hot summer's day in Southampton, New York, a woman pulled into a gas station, and as the attendant pumped her car, the woman told him that she was in a hurry because she had to pick up her daughter in East Hampton. All of a sudden, a well-dressed man walked over to her car and started talking to her. He said that his rental car had died and he needed to get a ride to East Hampton for a very important appointment. The woman said that she would be very happy to give him a ride, so she put his briefcase in the back seat, and he said that he needed to use the washroom very quickly. So the woman looked at her watch, and then she panicked because she was running extremely late. She totally forgot about giving this man a ride, and she took off to go pick up her daughter. Once they got home, she realized that she left the poor man stranded, and she thought to look inside of his briefcase for some ID so she can try to contact him, return it. But once she looked inside, she noticed that there was a butcher knife, duct tape, and clear plastic wrapping. This is exactly why you should never pick up hitchhikers because you almost became that person's next victim.
Number 9. Ghost Woman. One ranger took to Reddit to share his story of a scary prank that became much more than it seemed. He went to a watchtower to cover a night shift due to the large number of night shift workers who had recently been quitting. With a 5-hour energy in hand, he was prepared for the long night ahead. The watchtower was tall with multiple flights of stairs leading to the top, and it was surrounded mostly by thick forests and one small pond. No sounds except that of nature and owls. When he looked out, he saw it looked like a snowman, but with the realization that it was summer, he looked closer and saw it was a kid in what looked like one of those classic ghost costumes made of a sheet with holes cut into it. He radioed his only partner for the night and sent him out to go check out the apparent ghost. When he looked out, the person was gone, and while talking to his partner, the radio suddenly cut off, and he saw his partner's flashlight on the ridge go dark. Things seemed to go completely silent, not even the sound of wind or animals. Scared, he moved towards the stairs, and at the bottom of the stairs he saw a woman, tall, skinny, and dripping with water. Her skin seemed blue, wearing a ruined gray dress, and with milky white eyes and her mouth hanging wide open. He rushed back inside and locked the door, desperately calling out on the radio to his partner. He turned and got startled, seeing the bedsheet ghost standing there. He removed the sheet and found it was just his partner's son, laughing to his father about managing to prank the ranger. He was unimpressed, asking if the woman on the stairs had maybe been his partner's wife. Things grew tense and serious as his partner responded saying that he hadn't put anyone on the stairs. It hadn't been a part of the prank. Number 8. Yosemite National Park. Yosemite is a very well-known park with a great history, and today's story goes back to the person known as the park's first ever ranger, Galen Clark. When he had been close to Grouse Lake, he heard a loud wailing sound and he reported it. He thought that maybe it had just been a lost puppy or other animal, so he didn't think it was a big deal and wasn't particularly scared. However, when he spoke to a group of people at their camp, they told him that he had experienced a ghost, specifically the ghost of a little boy who had drowned in the lake long ago and now howls at anyone who comes near. Just like that, Galen Clark had discovered what came to be known as the Grouse Lake Ghost. People to this day are still told stories of the ghost and report hearing his cries, many avoiding the area in fear of hearing the sound. Number 7. The Lost Hiker. This story comes from a park ranger who works in an area with very dense forests just north of the United States border. When he signed on to his shift, he got a call for a missing person, not completely out of the usual for the job. It was described as a hiker who had been missing for the last 2 days, wearing a sweatshirt and a red backpack. He headed out on his truck to the place the hiker had last been seen, and eventually headed out on foot, as he hadn't found the hiker on any roads. He calls for backup and waits, his partner eventually arriving with his jeep. They made their way to a trail where it was common for people to get lost, as the path splits and goes deeper into the woods. They found a campsite, and after looking around, he discovered that his partner was no longer nearby. He waits around for a while, calling out to his partner on the radio multiple times but getting no response. Eventually he decides to make his way back down the trail and sees a guy with a red backpack, matching the description of the missing hiker. He described him as walking strangely, not moving his arms, almost like a robot. The man ignores him as he calls out, but eventually nods slowly when asked if his name matches that of the missing hiker. The ranger puts him in the back of his truck and radios his partner again, this time getting a response. What he heard, however, is not what he expected. His partner tells him that he had found the missing hiker, injured, and he's heading back to base. When the ranger told his partner that this doesn't make any sense as he had found the hiker, his partner seemed to panic, saying to lock the truck and grab his weapon, and don't let the man out of your sight. As the ranger cautiously makes his way back to the truck, he finds it empty and badly damaged, no sign of the person that he had found. He sits and waits at the truck, anxious and scared. His partner eventually returns, but he never got any answer of just who or what he had met out on the trail. Number 6. Stairs to nowhere. Have you ever been walking in the woods and seen what is clearly a staircase coming out of the ground and seeming to lead to nowhere? Even if you haven't, there are plenty of people that will tell you that they have. There are many reports of these staircases coming from all over the world. One park search and rescue worker recounts how these staircases in the woods seem to be so common that his coworkers would just tell him not to worry about them, but don't go anywhere near them. The staircases range in age and material, from broken wooden steps to modern staircases built out of stone. While some can be explained as being the remnants of an old broken down building, others completely stand out from the area and seem to be in a well-maintained condition. Some reports have even come in about staircases that would appear to move in the middle of the night, showing up in different areas than where they had previously been. So who built these stairs, and just where might they be leading to? Number 5. Kenai Fjords National Park. A frozen park in Alaska, Kenai Fjords National Park is home to many different urban legends and scary tales. One story goes as follows. In the late 80s, two newlyweds were visiting the park to go dredging for gold at a nearby mud flat. However, they got their ATV stuck in the mud. They got out of the ATV so they could attempt to push it out and rescue their vehicle, but the wife unfortunately got stuck as well. And as the tide rose around her and she was unable to escape, she drowned. When the park's search and rescue team arrived, it was too late for them to do anything, as the tide was too high to make any sort of rescue. They had to wait for hours for it to go back down in order to recover her body. They say that in the area you can hear the voice of a man desperately calling out for help, the sounds of an ATV trying to escape the mud, and the gasps of the young woman fighting for her life. Number 4. Mountain lion. No, this isn't just a story of someone stumbling upon a mountain lion. That would be pretty boring. Well, not for the lion. Instead, this is a story of a scary experience a park ranger had while out scouting for the animals. They had received a lot of sightings, so they went out to search and close off any trails in the area. He was out on his own in a dark forested area of the park around dusk, when he heard what he said sounded like a woman screaming. This wasn't too abnormal, as the call of a mountain lion sounds just like that. He radioed to tell his team that he had heard the lion and was going to go searching to see if he could discover where its territory was. He heard the screaming a few more times, all from the same area, so he marked it down and got ready to head back. But then he heard another scream that sounded dangerously close to him. He starts heading back faster, breaking into a jog to get away. About a mile from the base, the screaming stopped. When he looked back, he saw what looked like the figure of a man. As he walked over and went to tell him to head to the visitors center, he said that the figure took a quote, impossibly long step toward him and let out a scream, just like what he had been hearing and had originally assumed to be the mountain lion. The ranger immediately broke into a run, sprinting back to base and not looking back. By this time, the screaming had moved deep into the woods again. Not mentioning what had just happened, he just told the team that they needed to close the trails in the area and keep people away. Number 3. Mammoth Cave National Park. If dark, spooky, haunted caves are your thing, for some reason, then Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky is the place to be. With over 400 miles of underground passageways, the cave has plenty of stories and experiences from rangers to keep you up at night. In 1839, the cave was curiously turned into a tuberculosis sanatorium by one Dr. John Croghan. As a dark, deep, unventilated cave isn't really the best place for a hospital, 5 patients reportedly died while under the doctor's care. Their bodies were laid out on a slab of stone that was referred to as Corpse Rock, because what else do you call a rock with corpses on it? Rangers and visitors alike can apparently hear the ghosts coughing whenever they walk by the slab, and the most common ghost sighting reported by rangers is that of Stephen Bishop, a servant of the doctor who worked as a tour guide and ranger. He apparently likes to tag along on the tours and apparently shove and grab unsuspecting visitors. Number 2. The Man with Black Eyes. Another search and rescue team member recounts this story that happened to them while looking for a young woman who had been separated from her hiking group. They were out late at night as their dogs were tracking the scent when they found her curled up and scared behind a log. While she didn't have any injuries, it was clear that she had been scared by something. While walking back to base, she kept looking behind her, questioning why a big man with black eyes was following them. The rangers brushed it off, just thinking it might have been a symptom of shock. As they kept going, however, the woman got worse, telling the man to stop making faces at her, and even turning and yelling into the forest for the man to leave her alone. Suddenly, everyone started hearing weird sounds all around, an indescribable, deep and rhythmic noise. As they were close to the base, the woman turned to the ranger, touching his shoulder and saying, "He tells you to speed up. He doesn't like looking at the scar on your neck." The ranger was unsettled as he did have a scar on his neck, but it was hidden under his collar, and there was no way the woman would have seen it. He suddenly heard the strange noise right in his ear, quickly rushing away from the scene with the woman to make it back to base. Number 1. Men in Black. A man was working on a trail crew, building a new trail away from an eroding cliff. By mid-morning, they decided to take a quick break, leaving the 2 other members of their crew behind. He suddenly heard a whistling tune. He thought it was his crew, so he called out to them to leave him alone and let him do his business. The whistling stopped, but then just down the hill, he saw 2 men. They were both dressed in black suits with top hats and carrying canes. They had no water, packs, or anything else they might need for being that deep into the woods. He immediately started walking back to his crew and told them what he saw. They returned back to the area and saw the 2 men again. One of his crew members yelled down at them and waved, but the 2 well-dressed men just ignored them, continuing to walk through the forest off the trails, just weaving in between trees. I guess maybe they might have just been searching for an opera in the woods.
Coming into number 10, we have the Yellowstone bear attack. I was always told by my friends in Ontario that I shouldn't be too afraid of black black bears because they're not going to kill you, it's the grizzlies you need to watch out for. Now I don't know if that's true or not, but in 2010 a grizzly bear rampaged through a heavily occupied campground in Soda Butte near Yellowstone National Park. This all went down in the middle of the night, and sadly one man, Kevin Kammer, was killed and 2 other people were seriously injured. A woman suffered severe lacerations and crushed bones from bites on her arms, and a man had part of his calf ripped off. Other campers ran to their cars to hide from the mother bear and her cubs. Now it seems the bear had wandered into the chained campground and started slashing at tents. One survivor, Deb Freely, said she was woken to feel her arm being bitten into. She said when she woke up her tent was totally slashed. Worryingly, she said nobody stopped to help her. She only survived by playing dead, and after a while was able to grab her bear spray, although at this point the bear and the cubs had moved on and eaten another man. The attack was the most vicious and brazen in Yellowstone since the 1980s. The bear sadly after that was euthanized. Okay, next up, let this be a warning to anyone who uses a mini barbecue and brings it into a tent for warmth. Don't do it.
Number 9. Artifacts. One ranger for a coastal park in South Carolina recounts his experience from opening up the park in the mornings. When preparing the park in the morning, you have to go on a complete park tour, which also means riding down the beach. The ranger said that in his 2 years working there, he would often find turkeys and chickens chained up on the beach, placed there to pass away when the high tide came. They also recounted finding many different strange artifacts that were either left behind or had washed up on the coast, including things like random bones or pieces of clothing. He spoke to some of the other staff there, and many told him that this was the remnants of black magic. They also told him not to confuse it with root magic. While root magic is typically used for positive things like asking for love, health, or luck, black magic is generally more negative and usually involves a sacrifice, hence the chickens and turkeys that they had often found. Number 8. Something near the campsite. A group that consisted of a park ranger and 3 botany nerds were hiking in the woods for a few days when they had an incredibly scary experience. Day 1 went off with no problems, but around dusk on day 2, they were startled by the sound of a scream. As they were all pretty experienced, they brushed it off as a coyote and just looked around the area. The next day, however, things got worse as they heard what they described as a tree falling down. As they searched around, they all saw a figure in the bushes looking out towards their campsite. They all started yelling loudly as they thought that maybe it was just a bear that they could scare off. But it wasn't a bear. They saw the figure again, a tall man seeming to be leaning over something and turning to look towards them again. When it stood up, it looked to be over 6 feet tall. As the ranger raised his weapon towards it in fear, it took off into the forest, apparently faster than any human or animal should be able to run. When they went back to the area to see what the man had been leaning over, they found the remains of an animal, but not looking like it had simply been attacked by some other predator. The group were rightfully scared and packed up camp, leaving the area, fearing what they thought might have been a Wendigo. Number 7. No tracks. This story comes from an instructor for a therapeutic wilderness program where he was in charge of the at-risk youth. He was on the clock in charge of the program for 16 days, 24 hours a day. His second year working with the program, he was staying at a campsite with the group, the shelters just being simple yurts. When they settled down that night, it had snowed, leaving a pretty thick coverage on the ground. He was woken up at around 1 in the morning when one camper had to go to the bathroom. When the camper returned, he told the instructor that he had seen someone out there wearing a plaid shirt. He brushed it off as when he looked out, he didn't see anyone. But eventually, a few hours later, nature called him as well. And when he was out there, he saw someone standing in a plaid shirt. He quickly grabbed his flashlight to shine it on the figure, but in the split second it took him, the person disappeared. No sign of him anywhere around the area. He woke up another instructor to go and search for the person, but they didn't find anything. The scariest part? They didn't even find a single footprint in the snow. Number 6. Strange encounter. This one is short and sweet, but I think one of the most bizarre and scary on this list for how real it is. The worker was surveying a restoration site near an old trail when he heard somebody walking up a nearby path. He grabbed all of his things and proceeded down the trail, walking confidently so as not to give the other person the idea that he could be easily taken advantage of. When he turned the corner on the trail, he saw a shirtless man swinging a crowbar around wildly. The man made eye contact with him and yelled out, "I've got a crowbar, I've got a crowbar." The worker mumbled out a quick, "Nice crowbar," before turning around and running back to his truck. So no ghosts or mythical beasts in this story, just a terrifying man wielding a crowbar. Totally normal. Number 5. Banjo audience. One park ranger was taking care of 2 pretty remote parks about 30 miles out from any occupied homes, and even then these houses were usually empty during the summer months. One night he decided to hop into his car and head to one of the darker parks so that he could take in the meteor shower that was going to be happening and also get in some practice on his new banjo. He was sitting on a park bench under the stars playing with the banjo strings when he started to get an uneasy feeling in his gut. No, he hadn't eaten some bad food, he was getting the feeling that somebody was watching him. Questions started to go through his head like, what if someone shows up? This is the burned car park, what if they come back? He continued playing to try and avoid the silence when he heard sounds coming from the bushes and he started to really panic. The sounds seemed high pitched and he started to wonder what reason children could have to be deep in the park late at night. As it turns out, it wasn't children. Instead, 3 coyotes came running out of the bush. Apparently they'd been enjoying the concert. Number 4. PHILMONT Scout Ranch. A ranger who worked at PHILMONT Scout Ranch in New Mexico told his story of what had happened on one of his trips, it being a summer camp combined with a backpacking trek. The group were around Uraca Mesa. It's in the shape of a skull and has various different legends surrounding it, like it being haunted or even being a portal to the underworld. One of these stories is that at night you can see strange and unexplained lights coming from the top. Well, this ranger had worked there for 4 years now and never saw them, thinking it was just some crap made up by the other staff. Until one night a kid pointed up at the mesa and made notice of lights coming from the top. The ranger brushed it off as being the lights of the other group who would be joining them. But when he looked, he realized the lights weren't coming from the trail. They were coming from off to the right behind the mesa, and it didn't look like flashlights at all. They were bright blue. 15 minutes later, the other group arrived and the lights were still there, putting away any ideas that it might have been them. To this day, he has no explanation for what the lights could have been. Number 3. Intense pressure. This story comes from a worker who was doing a survey in a park in the interior of British Columbia. Most of the rest of the crew had already gone home, leaving behind just him and his boss together for a few days to confirm coordinates and finish up some mapping. They made their way out to one area on an old logging route, and from the second they got there, he said that things felt off. 15 minutes later, they heard an incredibly loud whomp sound, saying he could feel the pressure in his ears. He looked towards his boss, who also looked incredibly pale, and they heard the sound again, saying the intense ear pressure and chest pressure made him feel like he was being squeezed. They immediately packed up and left, not discussing the event and never figuring out what it was. But he says that it was most similar to the feeling and sound of a giant bird flapping its wings, leaving many people to believe that he had experienced the legendary Thunderbird. Number 2. The Soldiers. A crew of about 10 people were out in a park in Washington state building dig lines. They were deep into it, about 60 miles from any other sign of life. As they were walking, they came across a clearing. The weird part was that there were 2 helicopters there, along with 7 fully armed military personnel. They had pointed their rifles at the crew, demanding to know what they were doing in the area. They said that they were doing dig lines and had been scheduled to be there, putting their hands up in fear. The soldiers told them to turn around and leave and forget they were ever there. The frightened people said that they were doing government work and they had to be there. One of the military men responded by saying, "No, you're not today, get the F out of here." They weren't going to argue with that, so they turned around and quickly went on their way. I'm sure we've all thought at least once that the government is hiding something from us, and this is a good sign that there's more than meets the eye. I'm not gonna tell you they were guarding aliens, but I bet they were guarding aliens. Number 1. Abandoned. This one comes not from a forest ranger, but instead from a soil conservationist who spent a lot of time looking at cropland and prairie restorations, saying it wasn't uncommon for him to find himself miles from the nearest road. One time he was in a pretty heavily wooded area of his county, about a mile from the road, when he came across a clearing. But it wasn't empty. Instead, it was an abandoned playground and school bus with a rusty swing set and a huge rainbow merry-go-round. While this is creepy enough on its own, he was extra terrified by the fact that the merry-go-round was spinning rapidly in circles, with nothing in sight that would have caused it to move. He called out, and it didn't seem that any people or animals were around the area. Freaked out, he turned around and made his way back. He thought it must have been an old school, so he asked his archaeologist to look and see if anything had ever existed there, but they couldn't find anything about it or why there would have been a playground deep in the woods. Number 10. The Creek. This first story comes from a park counselor who tells of his experience that he shared with one of his coworkers. When taking a hike with a group to the tallest mountain peak in their state, he and his friend decided to go for a quick hike at night to get away from the group for a little while. They were looking at the stars when he heard what he described as the beautiful sound of water. He had this image of a clear, crisp creek stuck in his head, and the sudden urge that he just had to go find this creek. He said it was not just an urge, but a need. Since it sounded nearby and the need was stuck in the back of his head, he and his friend silently stood up to go in search of it. As the sound got so loud that it must have been right beside them, but they couldn't see anything, they decided they would go in search of it tomorrow. As soon as they made that decision, the sound and desire to find the creek was completely gone. As they stood there in the sudden silence, he said he could feel the presence of someone watching them, but nobody else was around. The pair silently and quickly made their way back to the camp, unsettled by the experience. When they went back the next day and looked at their maps, they discovered that there weren't any creeks, rivers, or other bodies of water that could have made the sound anywhere nearby. He describes how the night had made them both feel like it was a sinister presence attempting to lure them somewhere, and who knows what could have happened if they had continued in their search for the mysterious creek.
The dead boyfriend fatally comes onto this list at number 9. A young woman and her boyfriend were on their way from home on a date one night when suddenly his car ran out of gas. It was very late at night and they were literally in the middle of nowhere. The boyfriend got out of the car and told his girlfriend that he was going to walk to the nearest gas station, but she should, lock the doors because it's not safe. After about 10 minutes, she sees a shadowy figure quickly approaching her car. When he gets closer, she notices that that's not her boyfriend, but he is a strange, crazy looking man with the blood on his clothes and he's carrying something in his right hand. He comes up to the window and slowly pulls up his right hand, and guess what it was? You guys won't believe it. It was her boyfriend's decapitated head. I mean, is this real life right now? She goes into shock like everyone else would. I would be freaking out. She closes her eyes in horror. When she opens her eyes, the creepy man is still there. He's grinning like a psychopath. The psychopath that he is. He slowly begins to lift his left hand, and in it, he is holding her boyfriend's keys to the car. I mean, I guess having those locked doors isn't safe anymore now, is it? I would open the door and start running and yelling for help. Driving into number 8 is a Lover's Lane. A young couple just finished watching a movie at the local theater, and they decided to go up to Lover's Lane before returning home, because why not? The boy turned on the radio, and just as he reached over to his girlfriend, there was a warning about an escaped murderer who snuck out of an insane asylum who has a hook instead of a hand. The boyfriend thought it would be hilarious if he teased his girlfriend into thinking that there was a serial killer lurking around Lover's Lane, so he's trying to scare her a little bit. He thought that she would want to cuddle up to him because she was scared, but instead she insisted that they went home. Once he dropped her off at home, she began to yell and faint. The boy jumped out of the car and saw that on the door handle was a bloody hook. There are so many urban legends about a man going on a murdering spree with a hook, so this could actually be a true story. The fatal braids creeps us in at number 7. A little girl had been wearing braids in her hair for a very long time. Apparently these braids were so old that they must have been around like 2 to 4 months old. Her mother never took them out or washed her hair or anything. The little girl began complaining to her mother about having a terrible headache. The mother brushed it off and she didn't give it too much thought. The poor little girl would complain to her mom so many times, but still she didn't do anything about it. But one day at school, her teacher asked her what was wrong, and the little girl said that her head hurt. The teacher thought that maybe the braids were too tight, so she took them out and she couldn't believe her eyes. When she removed the braids, there was a huge spider in her hair that laid eggs. The spider was eating her scalp, so she was immediately rushed to the hospital, and sadly she later died. Oh, and if you think that this is just a campfire urban legend, you would be wrong. This actually happened to a little girl in Monroe, Louisiana. That's pretty messed up, but you know what, let's move on. Number 6. Number 6 brings us to the killer underneath the bed. So make sure you guys are checking your beds before you go to bed. A young girl's parents are out for the night, and even though the girl is still quite young, she convinced her parents to let her stay home alone and not to hire a babysitter. She promised that she will go to bed at her regular time and to call them on their cell phone, before she goes to sleep. The little girl is almost asleep, but she began to hear some dripping noises. She looks out of her window to check if it's raining, but it wasn't. So she jumps back into bed and hangs her arms over the side, and then she felt her dog lick her hand. So the little girl gets up again to turn off the lights, but the dripping noises started to continue. So finally she checked her closet, and she can't believe what she saw. Her dog was hanging in her closet, dripping in blood. Well, there was a note attached to it, and this is what it said. It said, "Humans can lick too." I mean, this is just so creepy. There have actually been a lot of cases where strangers are found living behind the walls or in attics of people's homes. So I have no doubt that something like this has happened before. The clown statue scares us in at number 5. A teenage girl was babysitting for a wealthy family in California. They had a very large house with a ridiculous amount of rooms. Before the parents left their fancy dinner reservations, the father told the babysitter that once the children are asleep, you should go to this room to watch TV. He didn't want her to wander through the house, so she agreed. Once the parents took off and the kids were in bed, she went straight to that room to watch her show. But once she got into the other room, she noticed that there was a creepy clown statue, right there in the corner of the room. She tried to watch TV, but she couldn't handle this creepy clown statue, so she called the father and asked if she can move it to another room. He immediately said, "Get out of the house, go to the neighbors, and call 911, and then call me back." She frantically did what he asked, and when she called him, he said that they don't have a clown statue, and the children have been complaining about a clown watching them as they sleep. He thought that they were just making it up, but apparently they weren't. So the police came to the house and arrested the clown, who ended up being just a little person living in their house watching the family as they slept. Yeah, kinda creepy. There are so many other creepy stories like this that have happened in real life. If you want to see that video, you guys can actually click right over here. This is the top 10 scary home break-in stories. The hide and seek game gone horribly wrong is in at number 4. Back in the 1970s, a young couple decided that they wanted to get married right after high school. The father of the bride was extremely wealthy, and he owned a large mansion, so he could afford to throw them a massive wedding. After the wedding, they had a huge reception in an old building, and everyone, they got pretty drunk. When there was around 20 people left, the groom thought it would be fun to play a massive game of hide and seek. That sounds so funny to me. At a wedding, you're playing hide and go seek. Well, after 20 minutes, everyone had been found except for the bride. People were looking everywhere for her. They tore the entire place apart, but they had no luck finding her. Like, where did she go? The groom was heartbroken because he thought that his bride ran off. Well, 3 years later, a woman was cleaning up this old place when she went up to the attic and discovered an old trunk. You guys kind of know where this is going. She dusted it off and opened it up to only find the bride inside. Apparently the bride decided to hide in the trunk for the game, but when she sat down, the lid fell on her, knocking her unconscious, locking her inside. She suffocated, and when the woman discovered her, she was just rotting there with her mouth in the shape of a scream. That is brutal. Now at number 3, we have the babysitter. A married couple decided to go out one night, and they called their teenage babysitter to watch their children. When the babysitter arrived, they told her that the kids are already asleep, so you don't need to disturb them, and will probably be out late. So the babysitter starts to do her homework when all of a sudden the phone began to ring. She answered it, but hears no one on the other line. After a few minutes, the phone rang again, and this time a man says in an extremely scary voice, "Have you checked on the children?" And then he just hung up. She thought that it was the father calling and he lost connection, so she ignored it and went back to do her homework, but then the phone began to ring again. This is like a movie. It was the same creepy man asking if she checked on the children. She became really scared, so she decided to call the police. They traced the call, and they said that she should leave the house immediately because the phone call was coming from another room inside of the house. Once she ran out, a policeman was there with a gun, and he was able to shoot and arrest the deranged psychopath who entered the house. After they dragged the man out of the house, he whispered to the babysitter, I wish this was your blood all over me. And after the police went upstairs to check up on the children, they discovered that they had been brutally murdered in their beds. This is exactly why you should lock your doors at home. I mean, this is a pretty scary world. Okay, moving on, the scarred man comes in at number 2. A young woman was driving home after a long vacation when all of a sudden, a huge thunderstorm began. She realized that she was very low on gas, so she decided to pull over at the next rest stop to fill up her tank. She finds herself in a deserted town, but the rundown gas station had an open sign on it. As she pulls into the gas station, a tall man with a badly scarred face comes running through the rain and starts to pump her gas. The woman felt, a little bit uneasy, so she rolled her windows down only enough to hand him her credit card. He grabbed it and ran inside. The man came back outside and told her that her card was declined and that she has to come inside. The woman debated on just driving away without paying. I would probably do that personally, but she decided to run in and quickly take care of the bill. So once inside, this man grabbed her arm and then he started to talk to her. His voice was hard to understand and she became frantic, so she ran back to her car and left as soon as possible. As soon as she was on the road, she saw something moving behind her in the rearview mirror. She saw a man in the backseat holding an axe. So the scarred man at the gas station was only trying to warn her. That's why there are so many warnings out there that remind you to look in the back of your car before getting in, because you never know who's lurking back there.
Someone's in the back seat!
At the top of this list, at number 1 is Buried Alive. An older couple who has been married for over 50 years, they had their whole world turned upside down when the wife unfortunately passed away from cancer. Her husband was devastated beyond belief, and after the doctor pronounced her as dead, the husband insisted that she was still alive. Because she seemed so hysterical, the doctor gave him some heavy sedatives in order to help him sleep. Back in the days, they did not drain the body of its fluids. They would only prepare the coffin, place the body into it, and then 6 feet under you go. The same night of the burial, the husband began having really terrible and vivid nightmares of his wife trying to scratch her way out of the coffin. He begged and begged the doctor to exhume his wife's body, but he refused. After some time passed, he still had these dreams, so he was able to finally convince the doctors to exhume the body, and once the pride coffin was opened, they discovered that his wife's nails were bent back and there was bloody scratch marks on the inside of the coffin. Yeah, you'd be surprised to find out how many people have actually been buried alive.